So let's start with advanced fighting fantasy, shall we? If you're our sort of age, you almost certainly remember books like this, City of Thieves, which was the 5th fighting fantasy game book, this one written by Ian Livingstone. Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson, who created these books, you may, if you're not familiar with these, know better as the founders of Games Workshop, now a particularly large company that, before it became simply Warhammer the company, made a lot of board games, and indeed it was originally set up to bring Dungeons and Dragons to the United Kingdom. This was before TSR had a UK branch. TSR originally published Dungeons and Dragons, if you don't know that. And Games Workshop printed the UK edition of Dungeons and Dragons in the time before TSR got their stock over here. They later did the same thing with RuneQuest 3rd edition and at least the 3rd edition of Call of Cthulhu. And while all of this was going on, Jackson and Livingstone discovered another thing, gaming-related thing from America that they wanted to bring over. And these were these choose-your-own-adventure books where you started out on paragraph 1 and you made decisions that told you which paragraph to go to as you went through the book. And eventually you either got it right or got it wrong, and it all came to an end. What they did differently with the fighting fantasy game books was these were the first ones that had a game system in. Prior to that, it was all about just the decisions. It was just go to paragraph 32, go to paragraph 297, and that was as far as it went. What they did with these is they put in a simple role-playing game system. So you had a set of stats, you had skill, stamina, and luck, and you had rules for actually fighting monsters. So instead of just turning to the appropriate page, you had to roll dice and fight the monster in a similar way that you would do in something like Dungeons and Dragons in a traditional tabletop role-playing game. And that hadn't been done before with these books. So they revolutionized what was already a pretty revolutionary idea. It had been around for a couple of years. They took it and made it even better. Then, with the success of that, that led on to the publication of things like Titan, which was the world in which these games were set. This is not the original edition of Titan, which was a larger format book. This is a later reprint that was put out to go along with the Advanced Fighting Fantasy role-playing game, which was the second time that Fighting Fantasy had been brought to the tabletop for a complete group. First off, they just did the Fighting Fantasy role-playing game, which was published in the same format as the game books were. There it is. Drutt's got a copy of it there. My copy, as it happens. And that sat on the shelf quite nicely alongside your game books, and it let you run Fighting Fantasy adventures for your friends. Later on, they did a new version of that, Advanced Fighting Fantasy, the core game book for which was called Dungeoneer, which I believe Drutt should also have handy. And that expanded the game system somewhat. So that introduced the idea of things like skills that hadn't previously existed in the game. You had a skill score, and if you wanted to do anything at all, you just rolled against your skill score. With Advanced Fighting Fantasy, it gave you the option to specialize somewhat. You could have a number of different skills which would be that little bit better than your base skill score, so you'd do better in them. And it also introduced things like weapon damages. Previously, all hits did 2 damage, no matter what weapon you were using. That changed in Advanced Fighting Fantasy, and they brought in weapon damages. They brought in armor that made you had a roll to avoid damage based on your armor. More full equipment lists, just making it that bit more like a full role-playing game. A few years back, I'm not sure exactly when, but I can probably find out, because as you can see if you're watching this on video, I've got up here the Advanced Fighting Fantasy role-playing game 2nd edition rulebook from Arion Games, and that was released. Do we have a date in the book? Come on, give me a date. That was released in 2011, so even that's now getting not exactly long in the tooth, But it's
older than I thought it was, I have to
been
say.
around a while now, and they made a few minor changes for that version of the system. Not many, to be honest. Reformatted it, and again they re-released Titan. They re-released Out of the Pit, which was the monster manual for fighting fantasy games. Titan and Out of the Pit both predate the tabletop role-playing game. These were resources put together, collated from the books rather than the role-playing game. So Out of the Pit contains 250 monsters that were featured in various fighting fantasy game books. And Titan was a description of the world that the fighting fantasy game books took place in. Not just based on the books, but also based on Warlock magazine, which is long since out of print.
Oh gosh, yes.
But which was a magazine that contained original short fighting fantasy adventures. You'd get 2 or 3 in each magazine, plus articles about the fighting fantasy game books, stuff about the monsters, stuff about the world, things like that. And that kind of information was brought together to form these books, Titan and Out of the Pit. Then later they were associated with the Advanced Fighting Fantasy role-playing game and re-released accordingly alongside this book, Black Sand.
Oh, yes.
Which is 2 things. It is both a complete adventure set in Port Black Sand, and it is also a source book on Black Sand, also known as the City of Thieves.
Of course
First
it is.
introduced in this, the 5th game book, and completely mapped and detailed very nicely for the Games Master in the Black Sand source book, which has a complete scenario in it as well. So that was it was very cool, and it was an excellent way of getting people into tabletop role-playing, because what these books did is they gave you an opportunity to solo play a nice simple game system that worked a lot like games like Dungeons and Dragons. It was a fantasy setting. You had all your bold adventure, and you went off with your sword and beat up monsters and got the treasure and completed whatever scenario it was that the book had. And then it was a simple step to go from there to playing something like Dungeons and Dragons, or an even simpler step to go from there to playing the Advanced Fighting Fantasy or just the original Fighting Fantasy tabletop game. It was never really intended as a game that you would play long campaigns of. It was really intended as a game that you could play quickly and easily and learn, and maybe go on to a more advanced game as a result, possibly Dungeons and Dragons, or possibly, given that Jackson and Livingston created this thing, maybe onto Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, which is one of the games that we have in our scheduled Sunday actual plays. That's the game that would be on now, were Nightbite's not in Berlin at TwitchCon.
Yes, not jealous. Not jealous
Not
at
even
all.
slightly.
It's fine.
So that's a little bit of the history of what Advanced Fighting Fantasy is and the role that it fills. So the question is, why are we talking about it here? It's not a new game. Even the new edition is now 8 years old, nearly. So why are we talking about it? Partly because of days like this, when our regular game doesn't work. This is a really, really easy game to just pick up and play. It's not like low-level Dungeons and Dragons, and if you want to just start quickly ad-libbing a D&D first-level scenario, you've always got in the back of your head, this character has 6 hit points. If I roll wrong, he's dead in 1 blow. And that's the end of this ad-lib. Fighting Fantasy is designed so that your characters are already heroes. They're probably the equivalent of about 10th level in D&D, maybe better. So these are guys that you can just pick up, throw into any situation, even if you've just got 1 player. Say if I started running now for Drutt, she could roll up a character, which would take very little time because there's only 3 stats and some skills.
Yep, exactly.
And I can just throw in orcs, goblins, whatever, and know that unless there's something really serious in there, she's probably going to fight her way through them without too much trouble. So even as a solo, you can go through and you can have plenty of action and plenty of combat, and the character will probably survive it. So that makes it a great pickup game. And something that Hint Plays Tabletop is missing at the moment is a pickup game.
Yep.
So we thought Advanced Fighting Fantasy sounds perfect to me.
Does.
And conveniently, there is a Fantasy Grounds rule set for it. It's not an official rule set, it's a community rule set, but it's nicely put together. Being a community rule set, it doesn't include the copyrighted materials. So there's a lot of stuff from the books that isn't in the rule set. It's got the list of skills, for example, but it doesn't have the skill descriptions because that's copyrighted material. You have to copy that out of the book. And the clue there is in the word copy. So without an officially licensed rule set, that information can't be in there. But it's very easy for the GM to put that stuff in for themselves if they can be bothered, especially if, like me, you've got the PDF version of the game, because you can literally just copy-paste that skill description, if you want it, from the PDF into Fantasy Grounds. Because you're doing it for your own personal use and not distributing it to people, that's fine. You couldn't distribute that modified rule set, because that would be breach of copyright, but for your own use, not a problem. If I just quickly turn off Adobe Acrobat for those on video so you can see Fantasy Grounds, this is an example of the way that would work. There I have put the continent of Alancia, which is where the original game books were set. I've taken that map from my PDF copy of Titan and I've imported it into Fantasy Grounds, so I've got a map that people can look at when I'm playing. I couldn't distribute that map, that would be a breach of copyright, but I can use that map.
Okay.
So, AFF is an excellent pick up and play. So we thought that's what we'll do. We'll put it in here as a pick up and play. It's very easy to run, it's very easy to play, it's not too dangerous, but it still has the right sort of level of drama and excitement that you want out of a role-playing game. So it's a great one to use for these pickup sessions when your regular game isn't on. And on that basis, I can highly recommend it even to experienced role players like ourselves.
Yeah.
No reason why you can't enjoy playing Fighting Fantasy, particularly if you were there in the early 80s playing these game books, and it's just that sense of nostalgia every time you dive into a game of AFF. You walk into Stonebridge or Port Blacksand and your brain is immediately transported back all those years to your possibly early teen years, who knows. And you don't have to be our age to do that, of course, because they've been in print on and off for that entire time, and they're back in print now with new Fighting Fantasy game books being written now by new authors. So there's a massive selection of these things available back in print now, and it's a great way of if you've got kids who want to get into role playing and you're a bit wary of buying them Dungeons and Dragons. You've looked at the price tag and you think, are they really going to play it? Well, for a $5 you can pick them up a Fighting Fantasy game book instead. If they enjoy that, then yeah, by all means, move on to something like Dungeons and Dragons.
The 5-finger bookmark is a perfectly valid way of playing.
Oh, everybody used the 5-finger bookmark, yes. It was this whole, which decision do I make? Nope, not that one. Back to the paragraph before, take the other decision. Also, an awful lot of people, and I'll admit I am one of them, were a bit wafty as to whether they rolled the dice to beat monsters.
I always rolled the dice, I just didn't necessarily take all the damage.
Yeah, sometimes I would fight the monsters legitimately using the rules as written, and sometimes I would just say, I want to get on with the story in this, so I'm going to just do the decisions and win all the fights. And that's a perfectly legitimate way of doing things. You can do that. It's the equivalent of taking something like, say, Tyranny or Pillars of Eternity and playing it on the minimum possible difficulty level because you're more interested in getting through the story than you are really in the detail of the tactical RPG. So it's great for that. So shall we get a quick character created to show how this works?
Yes, I have a character sheet.
Excellent. And while you are
I'm also
working on your
moving
character
everything
sheet,
around.
I will simultaneously
Come here.
put said character into Fantasy Grounds. So a little bit of a how-to here on Fantasy Grounds at the same time, though not in no way a complicated one. This also has a nice little character sheet built into it. They've done a lovely job on this. I can't off the top of my head remember who put this together. You do get a splash screen that tells you at the beginning, and he's done a great job on it. So, first decision.
Okay, unfortunately this is not a form fillable sheet. It is just the character sheet. However, it shows people what I'm looking at. And it also shows just how simple the game is. This is not a game that relies on 25-page character sheet with extreme detail.
Oh no.
And itemizing everything. And it also looks like the game books, which is a major, major plus to me.
So.
Okay. Walk me through it, Fishy.
Oops. Okay, before you try and type in a page number in Acrobat Reader, make sure that you've got the numlock turned on. So, hero creation. Right, if a new hero is created from scratch, it's normally a good idea to first establish a concept. So, what kind of a concept might your character be? Do you know Titan well enough to do something pinned to the world, or are you just going to go with a more generic adventurer type concept?
It's been a while since I played an FF game, and that was Death Trap Dungeon. So I just died a lot.
Yeah, because Death Trap Dungeon is notoriously dangerous.
Yes. Baron Succumbit can.
Yeah.
Right. So what I'm going to do... Have you got a capsule for Titan?
Have I got a capsule? What, a
say on the back of Titan.
Capsule description. Okay, on the back of Titan it says, Titan contains everything you need to know about the turbulent history of the planet, from its creation and early civilization through the devastating War of the Wizards to the present-day wilderness and anarchy, where the delicate balance between good and chaos could at any moment be overturned. Detailed descriptions of them and maps of Titan's 3 main continents, Alancia, Kakabad, and Kul. All the gods and deities, and demons. The forces and races of good and evil. Special expanded hierarchy of the pit section. The underwater kingdoms, the Titan calendar. Fascinating background information on everyday life, taverns and hostelries, food, clothes, even jokes. So it doesn't really tell you much about Titan. It just assumes you know what Titan is, because it's the fighting fantasy.
I'm thinking that I would very much like to go for somebody a little bit larcenous.
Okay, larcenous is good. We can go a little bit larcenous.
A larcenous hero.
Many of the best heroes are larcenous. I mean, Conan the Thief, Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser.
Yes. Yeah, he also got conned, however. I think, actually, yes. Now you've said Conan, I'm thinking, a nice agile thief with some halfway decent fighting skills.
Yep, okay. Is your thief, probably from that description, likely to be human, I would imagine?
I'm thinking human, yes.
Because your only other options are elf and dwarf, and
no, she's going to be human.
Doesn't really sound very elfy or dwarfy. So, once you've got your concept, then the next step is to create your characteristics.
Okay.
Now, in the old Fighting Fantasy game books, you rolled these. However, that's no longer the case.
No.
So, in Advanced Fighting Fantasy, you start with the following base values. You would have a 4 in your skill.
Okay.
And you will have 8 each in stamina and luck.
Why would anybody need luck?
Magic you will not have.
Nope, because I
Unless you
don't.
choose to put points into it. You don't have a starting magic score because only mages have one of them.
No. Be a bit much for her to know magic.
Probably,
Possibly.
yeah. So,
Although we could talk about it.
you then have 8 points to spend on these.
Okay.
You can add up to 3 points to your skill.
Mm-hmm.
You can add up to 4 points to your stamina, but for each point that you add, you actually get 2.
Yeah.
And you can have up to 3 points added to luck. Magic, which starts at 0, you can add up to 7 into. So it's possible to leave your other stats low and have a huge 7 magic. But...
Yeah.
So where are you going to put your extra points?
Okay, so skill. I'm just looking at the definitions here because I've got the book up. Skill. This characteristic represents the general ability of the hero to do things. Covers strength, agility, fighting prowess, social skills, and even knowledge. The only ability it doesn't encompass is magic. Right. So you said I can put up to 3 points into skill,
yeah? You can put up to 3 points into skill, yeah.
Well, gosh
darn
darn it.
Possible 7.
I am indeed. I want someone who is a bit good.
Okay, so
right.
7 skill.
So, also, you've been doing a lot of talking, so I thought I'd take the pressure off you for a little bit.
That's cool.
Okay. Stamina, which is fairly self-evident, determines the general health of the hero and how much physical punishment they can take from combat, poisons, and starvation. Starvation is a thing. A hero with a high stamina.
Although this is also one
blows.
of those games where eating a meal will heal your stamina. So
yeah.
Somebody runs you through with a sword, that's fine. Have a burger, you'll be okay.
Does that include the time it takes to stuff the burger back in through the hole that's been slashed in your stomach?
Possibly.
Fair enough. What do they put in their burgers? You can take a few blows before becoming unconscious, meaning stamina is important for all warriors. Sorcerer characters who use their own life energy to power their magic also require a high stamina. Stamina is between 1 and 24. Most normal people have a stamina of 7 or 8. Now, I've already started with 8 because I'm a hero.
That's right.
And that's double points, isn't it?
That's double points, yes. So you can put up to 4 points in and gain 2 stamina for each point you add.
But I've only got 8 points in total.
And you've used 3, so you've only got 5 left.
So yes, I don't actually have all that many left. So luck is a point per point, isn't it?
Luck is a point per point, and you can put up to 3 into that.
Okay. So what I am going to do is I'm going to put 2 points. I will allocate 2 points to luck, which leaves me with 3 points to put into stamina, which is plus 6. So that puts me to 14 stamina. And luck. This characteristic shows how fortunate the hero is and is used any time the hero's skill cannot be used. Avoiding traps, resisting magic, and stumbling upon clues are often down to blind luck. Luck, however, is a finite resource, and a hero's current luck value reduces when used, meaning a wise player will only test their luck when they have no other option. Luck is usually between 1 and 12. I will say that the phrase, test your luck, sends shivers down the spine of many a fighting fantasy game book reader.
This idea of luck reducing when used, it is as simple as it sounds. Every time you test your luck drops by a point after you've made that test. So next time you test, you've got a lower value, and then you're less likely to be lucky.
Yes. So I've allocated 2 points to it, so I have a 10 luck.
Okay.
Which is pretty darn high, to be honest.
That is extremely lucky.
Yeah.
Right, so you've actually got an 11 luck. Because when we move on now to race, we see that humans get +1 to luck. Elves get +1 to magic, dwarves get +2 to stamina.
Yeah.
These are for free, and they're outside of the limits of what you can put your points into. So
Okay.
once you've hit your maximum possible luck, you can still get an extra point for being human.
Yeah. Can I just run down? Do you mind if I run down the race descriptions? Because although I've picked a human, you can of course have the elves and
Certainly,
dwarves.
feel free.
Okay, humans. Basically, the elves, dwarves, and humans are the most likely to produce heroes. There are other races you can't play them.
Although, because the game is very simple, if you're familiar enough
It
with
would be easy
Titan,
enough.
it's not difficult to come
Yeah.
up with rules for a character from another race.
Humans are found in many shapes, sizes, and colours across Titan, from the pale skins and muscular frames of Frostholm to the dark skin and hair of the Shamatanti headhunters. Humans are found living as fur-clad barbarians, silk-clothed townsmen in stone castles, wooden huts, and caves. Almost any culture and racial type imaginable are found on Titan, and almost any of these are suitable hero material. The elves are fairly trad Tolkien.
Yeah.
An ancient and very long-lived race, naturally magical and at home in the woods and forests of Titan. There are several subtypes of elves. Most heroes of this will be of this common wood elf stock. Tall, lithe, and with pointed ears, elves usually have a haughty demeanour and consider themselves the most advanced race throughout the known world. Bitter enemies of the warped and twisted dark elves, the ancient elven race is normally insular, paying little attention to events outside their forest homes. Dwarves, shockingly, are short, heavily bearded people who live in underground cities and mines. Normally principled, dwarves love gold above almost anything else, and so can often be found living in the dungeons and caves of evil sorcerers if the price is right. Doughty warriors, due to their toughness and bravery, dwarven wizards and sorcerers are, however, incredibly rare. All dwarves consider the ancient city of Fangthane as their spiritual home, even if they haven't been there. So as a human, I get +1 to luck.
So there was a reference there to elves being bitter enemies of the dark and twisted, warped and twisted dark elves.
Mm-hmm.
So just looking at Out of the Pit for dark elves. In the time before the rise of human civilization, the different elven races went their separate ways across the world. The taint of evil had split them into two factions. In the wars that followed, the side of good won, however, and their opponents were forced to retreat beneath the earth, leaving the forests to the wood elves. In time, all memory of these evil tribes was forgotten in the darkness of their subterranean world, though the dark elves grew strong again and their civilization developed. So, as anybody familiar with D&D will recognise, the dark elves of Alancia, of Titan, are basically drow from Dungeons & Dragons. They even have the completely unreasonable jet black skin.
Yeah.
I will move underground where there is no sun, and naturally my skin tone will darken. But it's because it's got nothing to do with sun. It's not like a tan. It is literally that magic has turned their skin jet black in both cases. So, but that's what dark elves here are. They're just like the drow in D&D, if you're familiar with D&D. Unlike D&D, which in recent years has kind of decided to wuss on such things, dark elves in this game are not available as player characters because they're evil.
This is a very, very simple good and evil and heroes and not heroes.
It's a very white hat, black hat game, which is not a bad thing at all, because that's what you're looking for if you're playing this game. You're looking for something simple that you can just dive in and kick some monster butt.
Yeah, this is not the game if you're looking to really play your nuanced, semi-villainous character who is going to be edgy and spend half the time moping around in emo fashion and annoying the rest of the party.
So, taking an example from classic BBC science fiction, if you've picked up the science fiction version of this, because although there was never one originally, Arian Games have done a version of this game system for sci-fi purposes, and you want to use that nice simple game system to play your favourite science fiction series on the tabletop, don't pick Blake 7. It's not going to do it very well.
No.
Likewise, Babylon 5. bit too nuanced, bit too many grey areas for this game. So, dwarfs. We've had dwarfs. We've had our +1 to luck. So, right, special skills. You start out with some special skills that are gained from your race.
Okay.
And I'm just going to bring up the library here on Fantasy Grounds so that I can drag skills directly to the character sheet and not have to do any typing. So, for a human, you will get the following for free. You will get World Law.
Okay.
And that will be at 1.
Ooh. I think that means I can find my way to the corner shop.
Well, +1 is kind of reasonable. It's what you're going to get to begin with. You will also have City Law, although for a rural hero you can replace that with Forest Law or Desert Law or one of the other law type skills instead.
I don't really see
law,
her,
for example, or underground law, but
yeah, I don't really see her as city-based. So I'm wondering about forest or, in fact, desert.
They're not all listed in Fantasy Grounds here. I don't know if they're even all listed in AFF without looking. But essentially, there is one of these laws for each of the terrain types. So
Yeah.
we've got forest law, we've got desert law, but we would also have, for example, probably plains law for your nomadic plain dwelling type characters, mountain law for people who live up a mountain, that kind of thing.
Okay. Let's go with forest law then.
Forest law, okie dokie.
Which I think is a character from something. She's sort of tending away from Valeria from Conan into kind of Robin Hood-ish.
Right, again, that will be at +1.
Yep.
You will also have religion law at +1.
Okay.
Now, you get one other movement or stealth special skill. If you flick over to the next page, you'll see you've got a list of the movement and stealth special skills there. So I will just run through. You could have acrobatics, climb, dodge, jump, ride, or swim as the movement special skills. And I said movement or stealth, didn't I?
You did.
Stealth. Awareness counts as a stealth skill, apparently.
Oh.
Disguise, locks, sleight of hand, sneaking, and trap knowledge are all stealth skills.
Now you see, my automatic assumption is I want all of them.
But
you
only
give me
get
all of those
one
things.
of them to begin with.
I know. Okay, well, I think, to be honest, awareness is going to keep me alive to use any of the others.
Okie dokie, and that will also be at +1.
I also, if I remember correctly, and I saw it go through, get common speech at 4.
You do indeed, which
Otherwise known as BBC English.
Don't seem to have actually included in this rule set, so I'm going to have to add that one manually. So create item, new special skill,
One sec.
and we will call that common speech because that's what it is. And we will give her a level of 4 in that because that's what she gets. So there we go.
Okay.
Now, those are the 3 skills that you get just for being a member of that race.
Yep.
You then get to pick 3 different special skills, which you will add a +2 to.
Okay.
And then 6 special skills that will gain a +1.
Can I add to what I've already got?
I'm going to say no because it says no individual special skill may be chosen twice. No, yes. Although racial special skills listed above may be further improved. So, yeah. You can start with up to
Okay.
3 points in something, in theory, if you've already got a point in it.
Right. So, how many skills do I get to pick? There we go.
Well, you get 3 at +2.
Yeah,
And
3
then
at
another
+2.
6 at +1.
Right. I am whacking awareness up by another 2.
Okay, so your awareness is going to +3. You are very aware indeed.
Yep. And I'm also...
I'm thinking locks and trap knowledge are definitely going to be in there, but whether they're going to be at +2.
Yeah, locks and trap knowledge are going to be in there, as is acrobatics. And also swords. I'm thinking, in fact, because I've got Valeria stuck in my head now. So I'm thinking swords for one of my +2s.
Okay, so we'll give you +2 with swords.
And I sincerely hope everybody who's listening, watching, or whatever knows who Valeria is and knows what the film Conan the Barbarian is.
If you don't know who Valeria is, seek out preferably the full cut of Conan the Barbarian, which has quite a lot more in it than the version you normally see on TV and indeed used to see on VHS video. But the DVD seems... Certainly the DVD I've got is the full cut.
Yeah.
Excellent film, very good indeed.
Of the awesome Sandal Bergman.
Yes.
Played an excellent definition of a fighter thief.
Yeah, pretty much.
So
you've got one more skill at +2 to decide.
I do. I think it's going to be trap knowledge.
That's going to be your trap knowledge, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. So
I was torn
all
between
set
that.
for raiding those dungeons then with your trap knowledge.
I was sort of thinking it was going to be locks, but I think I prefer the idea of being able to deal with traps and spot them.
So logically then locks is going to be a +1.
They are. It is. They are is
acrobatics.
Yep. And climbing.
Drag climbing across and give you +1.
There's no point being stuck down a dungeon without the ability to get the hell out of it.
So that was 3, wasn't it? So you've got another 3 you can select. If you are thinking in terms of a dungeoneering type character, I wonder if it's worth looking at underground lore for a point. On that basis.
Oddly enough, I was just looking in that vicinity.
Okay, give you 1 point in underground lore. That gives you another 2 to select.
Yeah.
Oh, that's where we get common speech. There's a languages skill there, which would have to be replaced with the specific language. So it is in here. I just was looking in the wrong place.
I'm going to take jump.
Go ahead and jump.
Yep. Might as well jump.
Jump.
And then what else am I going to take? Then
Bear in mind, you can add one to one of your racial skills if you wanted. So you could have like your world lore or lore in group.
Unfortunately, no. I've got 1 point of skill left, and I have 2 skills that I really quite badly want. Is the problem.
And what are the 2 skills you badly want?
They are dodge and swim.
Well, bear in mind that you are pretty damn skillful.
Yeah.
So even when you don't have the skill,
I've got a chance.
You've got a pretty good chance of doing things just off your base skill, even when you don't have that specialist training.
I'm going to take... In that case, I'm going to take swim.
Okay.
By the way, I do apologise for occasionally swigging out of a bottle. Of all the prep bits before the stream, I completely forgot to get myself a glass. And I'm still dehydrated from this afternoon.
So you have got some special skills. Next up... Scroll down far enough. Next up, we get to talents. Now, these are very much an advanced fighting fantasy thing. They weren't in basic fighting fantasy.
Right.
Talents are special abilities that mark the hero out as something above the normal folk. Any normal person can learn special skills given enough time and effort, but only those marked out for greatness, be it for good or evil, have talents. Every hero... Okay, elves and dwarves get dark seeing for free. Humans aren't allowed to take dark seeing.
Okay.
Every hero then gets to choose one from the list beginning on page 31. Ooh. So you can be ambidextrous, an animal friend, arcane, but you have to have magic to do that.
Yeah.
Armor training, attuned, again needs magic. Blessed needs priestly magic. Combat reactions, crack shot. Familiar requires magic, I think.
No, it doesn't.
No, apparently it doesn't. Interesting. Hero does not even need to be a spellcaster to take this talent.
Yes.
Fast healer, fleet-footed, focus, Hawkeye, holy. Holy again requires the magical, the priestly magic. Oh, and focus requires magic. You can be knighted. Doesn't really fit this character, I don't think.
No.
You can be learned or light sleeper.
I'm awfully tempted.
You could be lucky, which you already have a phenomenally high luck score.
Yeah. I am actually very, very tempted to take familiar, but I'm having a look down.
So we also have natural linguist.
No.
You can't have natural mage because that's a magic thing. Natural physician. Physical empowerment. That's interesting. That's unfortunately used for magic. Doesn't say you have to have magic, but it's only wizards can use it. So.
Oh, okay.
You can be robust, which that's interesting. That restores additional stamina when you eat or sleep. So basically, you heal quickly with robust. And silver-tongued, a solid defense gives you a bonus in defensive options. You can have status, so your social status would be improved, and you get more gold to start with from that because you're a bit posh.
Yeah.
Strong arm gives you a bonus to damage because of your exceptional strength. Survivor is all about wilderness survival, finding food and so forth. You can be a trap master, which gives you a +2 bonus on trap knowledge rolls, as well as all skill or luck tests to avoid the effects of triggered traps.
Now
so that's one that might fit you.
Yes, that's a possible.
You can be
also
a
swashbuckler,
weapon
to be
master.
honest.
Oh yes, I skipped over swashbuckler somehow. So yeah, this allows you, an unarmoured hero, to reduce damage from attacks by dodging, ducking and weaving.
Did I take dodge? I didn't take dodge, never mind.
Yes, you do need the dodge special skill.
Need the dodge skill
to determine what protection you have.
And
yeah, weapon master will give you
nothing initially on my character.
Yeah, but as you get better, it would do, because that gives you, effectively, it gives you a default skill in other weapons.
Yeah.
Based on your swords, every 3 in swords gives you 1 in everything else.
Right. Currently, Trap Master is leaping out at me.
I can understand
that. Because I think that's pretty much what she's going to be doing for a living. It's not going to be status.
So in that case, I'm just going to copy the description of Trap Master from the PDF and paste it into your character sheet.
Yes, I
so
can't
that
really
you
see myself as silver-tongued.
have that available to you in game.
Okay.
The wonders of a decent virtual tabletop.
Yeah. Okay, so yes, I will put in Trapmaster.
Okay.
Okay.
So all that is left is for you to have a social status and some gear. Now, social status is really determined by your concept.
Yeah.
So I'm going to allow you to decide between social status 0 or 1. 0 would be a beggar, mercenary, or criminal. 1 would be a peasant or soldier, or an unknown adventurer that nobody's really heard of.
Yeah.
Even though you are already massively heroic and rather cool, because that's the way the game system works.
Nobody's ever lived to tell people how heroic
So
I am.
are you known as a criminal, which would be 0, or have you remained unknown and be at 1?
I think I have remained unknown for my criminal activity.
Okay, so we'll give you a social level of 1 because you have avoided the limelight.
21 apparently, or 1 in fact.
So, equipment. You will start with the following: 2d6 gold pieces, not gold peaches, which is a different thing. Not so tasty as the regular ones.
Hang on a sec. Yeah.
So,
2d6.
roll yourself 2d6.
Yep. Once again, thank you, Double Dice. Do love these things, they're awesome. Oh, wow. Okay, so that's 9.
9 gold pieces. Okay. You will have 1 weapon that you have a special skill in. So, in other words, you will have a sword.
Now, what kind of sword, Fishy?
This is Advanced Fighting Fantasy. Your sword will be a sword.
Sword, yes, okay.
Basically all you need to know.
Yes, alright. God.
You will also have... You don't have the armor special skill, so you won't have the leather. You will have a lantern and a flask of oil.
Okay. Backpack, which is ever so handy.
What I'm going to do here is I'm going to put the number of oil flasks that you have in the description of lantern, rather than give it its own entry in your equipment list.
I have provisions. As we said earlier, meals heal you.
Yep.
So provisions are not just flavouring to be written once on your character sheet and never change again.
No, they will be spent to heal as you go along.
Indeed.
So again, for provisions, I will put provisions in your inventory, and I will then list the number of meals that you have, which is 2.
Yeah.
In the description of that.
I then start with a magical potion of stamina, magic, or luck. Yes. This potion will restore 1 of stamina, magic points, or luck to its initial value when drunk. So, characteristic chosen.
Potion do you wish? Do you want a healing potion? A magic potion is no use to you, so presumably not
potion
that.
Of luck.
Or a potion of luck. Okay.
I expect to be testing my luck quite a lot.
Right. You are allowed to spend your any that you wish of your 9 gold pieces on additional equipment, but already you've got your basic adventuring gear. So for a quick pickup game, we're now ready to go. We can now all this character needs is a name, and we're off. We could start playing at this point. So here we're seeing the advantage of this game for quick pickup games. Doesn't take very long at all.
No.
And in fact, you could do it even more quickly if you really wanted to. because you could fall back on the rolled stats from the Fighting Fantasy game books, and instead of having the players umming and ahhing and deciding what to put where to put their points, you could just have them roll some dice, and they've got those stats. Give them the racial skill points, and then they've literally just got to pick some skills.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, picking the skills is the longest part, so that's the bit that's it's not going to speed things up that much, but you could do it.
Yeah. Okay. I am going to go with Tamris.
Tamris?
Tamris.
How is that spelled?
Tamris.
Just Tamris.
Nothing complicated.
Okie dokie. And how old is Tamris?
Okay, well, she stayed under the wire, but I like the idea that she has stayed deliberately under the wire. So it's not merely that she's
been
not
around
been
a while, but has managed to stay quiet.
She's been helping guardsmen across the road and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So what, maybe mid to late 20s, perhaps?
Mid-20s is fine, I think, yeah. What the hell is Scholar 27?
27 years old. There we go. And we have got a character here. Tamris, the human female adventurer.
Yes, adventurer is a good one.
Yes, age 27. Very skilled, very lucky. Not as rugged as some of her fellow heroic adventurers might be.
No.
But skilled enough that she can probably cope anyway. And with her phenomenal ability with traps, she is just made to go delving into those dungeons.
Right.
And there we have it. That is a character created for Advanced Fighting Fantasy. We could immediately dive in and start playing that if we wanted to. We're not going to, but what I will do is I will just sort of run through a little bit on the way the mechanics work for this game. Things like skill checks are rolled on 2 dice to get equal to or less than skill. So the average on 2 6-sided dice is 7, which means that Tamris' skill gives her a 50-50 chance of performing anything she's not specifically trained at. That's pretty good to be going on with. It certainly beats a low-level character in something like Dungeons and Dragons. As I said, these are not the equivalent of low-level characters. Looking at 3rd edition D&D, which is the edition that I know rather better in terms of skills, if you don't have points in a skill, but that skill can be used untrained, you're likely to have... Well, it depends on how difficult the task is. Probably a 50-50 chance, because the task is difficult, is likely to be a DC 10. Might have 5 or 10% boost to that from your stats. But once you start getting into anything that's actually difficult to do, those difficulties ramp up very, very quickly, and then you find yourself... say you want to pick a lock without the skill. Even if the GM lets you do it, the odds are you're going to have 5-10% chance of picking that lock. If you want to pick a lock without the skill in this game, we already know she's got a 50-50 chance. Because she has +1 in locks, she's actually rolling against a value of 8, so she's got a slightly better than that chance. So these skilled characters are skilled when you start out in this game. Things like awareness, 10 or less on 2 6-sided dice to succeed at an awareness check.
That's actually not
pretty
bad.
difficult to fail.
Yeah, that's not bad at all.
Let's just roll a quick awareness check here on Fantasy Grounds, and surprise, surprise, you've succeeded. So that's how those work. combat damage comes directly off stamina. Stamina's never
Okay.
rolled. It's a measure of combat damage. And the way combat damage is handled, for simplicity, the GM can simply assume that an attack does 2 points of damage if he wants. So that goblin coming at you, I may not bother rolling for the goblin. I may just do 2 points of damage every time the goblin hits you.
Okay.
When you hit a goblin, however, you're rolling a 6-sided die. Actually, you're rolling... Let me check, actually, how these rules work, because I can't remember. There's a little table for each weapon that gives you your damage. However, just did a quick test roll there, and it looks suspiciously like it's not a straight roll, because that rolled 3 dice when I did that. Hang on, let me just...
Weird.
Yeah. And it seems... Yeah, no, I have no idea what that did. We haven't played this game in a while, and I wasn't running it last time we did. So, Chapter 3,
Sorry.
Combat. Let me just check. So, for most basic combats, both fighters roll 2d6, add their skill score, the appropriate weapon special skill if possessed. Resulting total is their combat total for that round. Whoever has the highest total wins that round and does damage.
Yep.
So, winner of the round then rolls 1d6 to determine how much damage is inflicted. And that's good. Yeah, that's what I expected it to be compared to the appropriate weapon table. It may well be that your special skill gives you a roll and keep system.
Oh, okay.
No,
Do you mean my talent?
because your talent is trap mastery, which is not going to be
Yeah.
anything to do with weapons. I'm thinking your sword's special skill.
Oh.
I have not found such a rule yet, but...
Oh, hang on. Yes, I think it does.
So, possibly the way to find out might be to actually look at the description of the sword's special skill, but
Yeah.
let me just check. Weapons. It's just descriptions of weapons. Then we go to armor. So yeah, possibly let's check the description of the sword's special skill back in the appropriate place.
Okay.
Oops, gone past it.
Yes, combat is a little bit funky in this game. Only a little bit, but it is just a smidge off.
No, the description doesn't say anything there. I mean, this may just be something weird about the rule set here.
Okay, given I can't
But-
see Fantasy Grounds, although I did go into your game,
Yes, I noticed you've connected to it.
yeah, but I haven't got my character because it's not there and it's not available yet.
Oh, that's weird. Should be there. Maybe it's because I've got it open.
Yeah, I don't know if you have to save it or close it or something.
Make sure it's okay. Yeah, there should be 2 characters there because I created a test character the other day. So,
Oh, Tamis, there we go.
so if you can now claim Tamis, then you can see. There we go.
Yep.
Tamis now owned by Drutt.
She deserves a picture.
Yes, we'll have to sort out her.
I'll have to sort her out a picture. You have the character artist, of course.
Yes, I have character artist.
Yes.
Terribly useful.
I have an idea of what she looks like,
Yeah,
so I'm good with that.
when
So if I
I
want
pick
to
up
make
the dice there on the sword, it rolls 3, for reasons that I do not know.
If I pick up the dice
Now,
roll on swords, it rolls 2 for me.
you see, no, that's rolling on the skill, which
Okay.
skills are 2d6 to get less than skill plus the appropriate thing. You normally wouldn't. That's not how you would be using it in combat, of course. I think we're looking possibly here more at the vagaries of Fantasy Grounds than at a problem with Fighting Fantasy. Because the only reason that I'm even worrying about this is because I rolled what I assumed to be a damage roll in Fantasy Grounds, and it rolled 3 dice. I suspect that just not to be set up correctly, because I haven't found anything about it in the game as yet. So what it should be, by my reckoning... Yeah, there you go. That's weird, isn't it? And it's definitely a roll and keep, although weirdly it's not rolling and keeping the 2 best ones.
No. I think that's a skill check and the damage roll all in one.
You know what? I think you're absolutely right. Yes, if you roll that, it's giving you your skill check, which in this case is going to be 7 plus
it's
your
not comparing
7
to my skill.
It's not adding your skill, which you need to do for combat. So that would give you a so that roll then, would give you a 14 combat result. And then you've already rolled a 4, which is what the damage would be. So that 4 on the chart would be 3 damage.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Well spotted, that Drutt. There you go. We figured this bit out.
I thought the skill I had to...
And when we put this to audio, if we edit this for audio download, we can chop this whole section out.
Yeah. Is it just me? I thought we had to roll under our skill.
You roll under your skill for a skill check. For combat, it's exactly the same as Talisman. It's roll plus skill, highest roll wins.
Oh, yes.
Almost as if Talisman was created by the same people who gave us the Fighting Fantasy game books.
Yes.
But yes, if you've ever watched us play Talisman on one of our streams or on any other streams, because there's a very good digital version of Talisman available on Steam, then that's based on a board game also from the 1980s, published by Games Workshop, and as a result, it has a lot in common with Fighting Fantasy.
It does.
The earlier editions had more in common. Then it moved on to, they tried to tie it unofficially to Warhammer, and it had a lot of very Warhammer-esque elements in it, including at one point they did an expansion board that was all about time travel, and that had characters from the Warhammer 40,000 universe in it.
Oh gosh, yes.
But originally, its design was not officially anything to do with Fighting Fantasy, but very, very in keeping. You could assume that it took place on a Lancia, and that would work absolutely fine. Because it had the same feel to everything, including similarities in the combat system.
Yeah.
So there we go. That's how things work. If you want to pick a lock, you'd roll 2d6 to get less than skill plus your lock's skill, which would be 8. There may be modifiers if it's a particularly difficult or particularly easy lock. For combat, you would roll 2d6 and add your skill plus your swords, and if you roll higher than whatever you're fighting, you deal damage to them. If they roll higher than you, they deal damage to you. So every round of combat deals damage. It's not like a game like D&D where you can theoretically be going back and forth and everybody missing in low-level games. Fighting Fantasy is designed to be quicker and more exciting and dramatic than that. Every round of combat, somebody's getting hurt, and you just roll to see who.
I have run this. I've run the introductory scenario from the game, from the actual rule book, for you and Andrea or Robinson.
Possibly Andrea. Certainly wasn't. I don't think it was Robinson.
And it's handled multiple opponents quite nicely, although that does get extremely unpleasant.
There are rules for multiple opponents,
Mm-hmm.
and yes, they do get a bit awkward.
And also, critical. Yes, rules for multiple opponents they're okay once you get your head around them.
So, what happens there is you choose which enemy you're attacking, and you roll against them as normal. The other enemies roll as normal against you.
Mm-hmm.
If they beat you, they do damage. But if they don't beat you, you don't do damage to them because that's not your selected target.
Yeah.
So it is just a simple matter of, okay, there's 3 orcs here. I make one roll. Any of them that beat my roll do damage to me, but I pick one of them that I'm trying to hurt. And that's the way that works. So you've still got your reasonably good chance of not taking damage if you've got a good roll and good skills, because you can dodge out of the way of all 3 orcs, no problems whatsoever. But you can still only hurt one of them. You are still a hero, though, so you're not going to get mobbed. The game, multiple combatants, takes time to take down multiple combatants, rather than they're really dangerous and they will mob you and kill you. Because it's a heroic game, and that's not very heroic.
If, however, your hero drops to 0 stamina, they immediately fall unconscious, and if they ever reach -4 stamina, they die outright.
Yeah.
An unconscious hero bleeds out at the rate of 1 luck every minute, which is 6 combat rounds, until they're either given a first aid check, or healed with magic, or they reach 0 luck. And this game has a very, very hardcore concept. Once you're dead, you're dead.
Yeah, there are... I'm not going to say there is no resurrection magic in this game, because that's down to the GM. If they want resurrection magic, they can put resurrection magic in there. More likely, there's no simple raise dead spell like in Dungeons and Dragons. If you want to bring a hero back in this game, the odds are that's going to be the goal of the next adventure.
Yeah.
That player will either sit out or play a different character for the duration of the adventure, and they will set out to find some wondrous one-use item that can be used to heal them, or to take their body to that one mystic lake where their soul can be reunited with them. But it will be a big deal. It will be a scenario goal. It won't just be a thing that you do, or you won't go to the temple and say, here's 10 grand, bring me back my character. But it's also much harder to die, because the odds are your heroes. The odds are stacked slightly in your favour. Not impossible by any stretch of the imagination. If you roll as badly as me, you're probably toast.
Talking of which, moving on to criticals and fumbles.
There are indeed criticals and fumbles. These are optional. You don't have to use the criticals and fumbles.
Oh, really? Why wouldn't
as
you?
I say, it's a nice, good pickup game and a nice, good, simple intro game. So you might, for example, if you're learning to play using this game, you might ignore the fumbles and the criticals to begin with. And then after you've played a few games and you're getting the hang of it, then you might pick up the critical rules. Similarly, you might start out, as I said, just doing the straight 2 damage for every hit, rather than using the different weapon damages and rolling the die for that. And then you can gradually bring these other rules in as you feel comfortable with them. Particularly useful if you're playing with kids, for example. So, if you've got your 11-year-old who you've gone through Warlock of Firetop Mountain with him and he really loved playing it, or her, and then they want to try proper tabletop RP, you can give them their character and you can start doing it nice and easily, using exactly the same rules as they've already played in the game book. The roll, do 2 damage, roll, do 2 damage.
And then you can take it from there.
Then, once they're comfortable with playing with a GM rather than a book, you can start saying things like, well, okay, now we're going to bring in special skills. You will have these special skills that will improve your skill value. At which point they're going to go, oh, that's cool, because what you've just brought in is something that makes them better.
Yeah.
And they're going to love that because they're getting better. Their character's now cooler than it was before. Then you can say, okay, what we're also going to do is we're going to bring in this roll for weapon damage. So instead of just doing 2, you'll do 2, 3, or 4 damage depending on what your roll is. So again, they're thinking, well, this is cool because I was doing 2 before. Now I could be doing as much as 4. Happy with that. Still getting better, still getting cooler. And gradually you can bring in all of these rules, bring in the critical rules, bring in the fumble rules, until eventually they've got to the point where they're playing with all the rules of Advanced Fighting Fantasy, and possibly thinking in terms of moving on and playing other games as well. Maybe Warhammer, maybe D&D, whatever happens to be, their cup of tea.
Yeah. I was just looking at the critical hit rule for this, which didn't come off often because you were
it's on a double
playing...
6, and I don't roll double 6s.
No. If a combat rolls a double 6, the combatant will automatically win the combat round regardless of combat totals, which is great.
Yeah, that's really useful for GM when you're fighting things like goblins and other fairly pathetic creatures who may have against a dragon. That's not really useful for the GM. It's really useful for the players against a dragon.
Yeah, true.
But just looking at an example here from Out of the Pit. A wild dog. You've got a hero fighting a wild dog. Now, we already know that Tamris is adding 9 to her dice when she rolls.
Yeah, so a wild dog is less likely to hit me.
On a double 6, that wild dog has still only got a result of 16. So without the critical rule, an average roll from Tamris would be a standoff, and the wild dog, even on a maximum roll, hasn't done any damage.
Which negates the wussier beasties in the book.
Yeah, so the double 6 means that it's always got a chance. If it gets the double 6, it's doing damage no matter how good your roll is.
Yeah. What I like is the long-term effect on the critical. The winner makes their damage roll as normal, but the number of amount of damage resulting from the table is doubled. Armor then applies as normal. The loser of that round must also reduce their current skill score by 1 due to muscle and bone damage.
Yep. So
it gets
critical
nasty.
Hits do nastiness to you.
And if both combatants roll the double 6, both crit on each other.
Yeah, then you get that situation where you get a double hit.
You get a double hit,
Each of them has unfortunately left themselves open in order to take advantage of their opponent's weakness, and as a result, each of them has been hit for that critical damage.
I can't imagine how that feels, Fish.
Yes, you can. You do HEMA.
Yeah, right.
So
Repeatedly this afternoon.
conversely, there's also a fumble, which obviously is going to be on a double 1 if a double 6 is for a critical.
Yep.
So on that roll, you lose no matter how well you roll. And there's also a fumble table.
Yes.
So you roll then your 2d6 on the fumble table, and you might hit yourself, you might hit your ally, you might fall over, you might accidentally let go of your weapon and hurl it back behind the enemies. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Just fun stuff to keep things interesting.
Also, if both combatants fumble, your weapons shatter.
Yeah.
This game is dangerous. It's quick.
Can be.
A little bit dirty, and it builds on the very simple premise.
On this page, there is a play tip, which if we'd read it, would have exactly explained what was happening in Fantasy Grounds. To speed up play, it suggested that each combatant actually rolls 3 6-sided dice for each combat, with 2 of them being of one colour and the third of a different colour. This way, the differently coloured dice can be used for either the damage roll or the armour roll as appropriate.
Yep. Hero hits self. Hero hits nearest ally or self.
So there we go. That is Advanced Fighting Fantasy, at least the basics thereof. Enough that you would have an idea of how to play. And if you see us playing, you'll have an idea of what we're doing. If it sounds interesting, you can check it out. It's published by Arion Games. It is available through RPG.
It is.
I'll try and put a link somewhere to that associated with this VOD or audio.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a really good, simple game. Not simple in terms of deficient in any way, because it's not. It's very playable, a lot of fun. It's got everything it needs, but there's no complications to it. There's nothing that will leave you confused as to what on earth you're doing. Fantasy Grounds confused me today. AFF didn't.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
So there we go. That is Advanced Fighting Fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So we said in the stream title that we would look at 2 games today. So let's take a look at the other one, Torg Eternity. A rather bigger, flashier looking book. At the moment, as far as I am aware, there has not been a softback release of this. This was kickstarted a couple of years ago. The company that make it, Ulysses Spiel, they, for other games, mainly for their Dark Eye role-playing game, which is a fantasy RPG, very big in Germany, they recently kickstarted, just before this, they kickstarted the English language version of the 5th edition of that. That has a very similar book, nice quality hardback, but they've since released a small format soft cover of that, which is considerably cheaper and far more convenient at the gaming table. Hoping that we will get one of them for Torg, because this is a lovely book and I want to keep it in good condition, but I don't want to just run from the PDF necessarily.
Yeah,
so
as a representative,
I'm hoping to be able to pick up the small format soft cover if they bring one out and run from that and keep this on my shelf.
Yeah, small format is a relative term. It's slightly bigger than A5.
Yeah,
I think. And
if you're familiar with the Pathfinder small format soft covers, they're exactly the same size.
Yeah. And it is, I mean, eminently usable.
Yeah, they're full colour, nicely laid out, and the font selections are good enough that even in that smaller format,
nice and clear.
It's still clear, still very readable.
Yeah.
The content is identical to the large hardcover in that case. They haven't reformatted the book except to shrink it. There's no editing inside. So what is Torg? Torg was originally released around about... Oh, hang on. I'm sure this will tell me if I look, because I forgot to look it up before we started the stream. So I'm just going to have a quick look in the forward here, and I'm sure it'll give me an idea. Or maybe not. I was kind of hoping that it would mention in that wonderful, slightly gushing but perfectly justified forward about how cool the original Torg was when the original Torg came out. 1990. I was thinking it must have been around the early 90s. So 1990 gives it perfectly.
And was a West End Games.
Yes, it was, and it was subtitled "Role-Playing the Possibility Wars." So in Torg, the Earth has been invaded by a number of other realities, or cosms, as Torg calls them. And the effect of this is that portions of Earth have had their own reality altered. It was a wonderful game. For me, back in 1990, it introduced me to an entirely new idea. I was fine with the idea of other dimensions and even other planes, other alternate material planes, prime material planes, as D&D had it. I'd visited alternate prime material planes in Dungeons and Dragons, in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and had to try and find my way back. But what Torg introduced me to was the idea that alternate realities could literally have their own reality. Things didn't work the same there. And the way Torg does that is each of these cosms has its own axioms. And these axioms determine, for example, whether magic will work there, how well technology works there, and indeed even how well people can group together. They have a social axiom, which determines things like if there's a low social axiom, there will be no large countries or other organizations, because they simply don't have the capability to form without that high enough axiom. Core Earth, which is what they refer to, which is what Torg's target world is. It's the world that has been invaded. It's not necessarily, it's not our Earth, clearly we haven't been invaded,
No.
but it's an Earth. Core Earth has magic axiom of 9, which is quite low. Social axiom of 23, which is quite high, so you can have things like the United Nations. A spirit axiom of 10, and a tech axiom of 23, which again is reasonably high, though not as high as some of the cosmos that have invaded.
Yeah.
Behind these invasions are what are called High Lords. Each High Lord has taken full control of their reality and are now invading Earth, seeking to steal its possibility energy, and ultimately they are all looking to become the Torg, which is this sort of mythical super being, essentially, and that's what they're all looking for. It's where the game gets its name from. They're looking to be the Torg.
I love the alleged naming convention of Torg back in 1990. Yes, they couldn't come up with a name. It was referred to as the other role-playing game.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
And they couldn't come up with a better name, so they just started using that.
Yeah, that's like
Came under.
one that we never actually published back in the day, but we were working on a game which is pronounced Tab. We've still got the full set of rules. Really ought to actually get them.
Yes.
Or to revise the skill system, which was the bit that never quite worked, and put them out, even if it's only as a freebie, because it was actually a really good, if I do say it myself, mechanic, really good game system. But that was, we never came up with a name for that either, and that was TBA, to be announced. Pronounced Tab, and it just never gained another name. We just decided to leave it at that. That will do. Or another example would be
play that.
One of my cats, one of the previous cats, who was called No Name because we never did come up with a name for her.
One of your previous cats.
One of my previous cats, yes. Not the one I have here, being a pest.
You have remained remarkably unbugged.
He's here.
Oh.
He's actually lying in my lap at the moment, wagging his tail at me, so...
Okay.
That was... This idea of the axioms was the first thing that Torg did that completely took a lot of people, myself included, by surprise from left field. Because suddenly we had these different realities where things would be different. You take your gun, your machine gun, into the living land, which is the portion of North America that has been invaded by a Tarzan of the Apes dinosaur jungle reality. And that gun won't work because the living land's tech axiom isn't high enough to support a machine gun. As a result of which, when you're wandering through the living land, you can find things like broken down, rusting vehicles and you could find them literally within days of the invasion and looking like they'd been there for decades because of the way they were adapted to the new reality as it came in. And this works particularly nicely because what you've got is a game with multiple genres where you can have the same characters fighting dinosaurs one week in a jungle, and then the end of that scenario they all go back home, and next week they're in Japan in a cyberpunk setting hacking into computers, dodging lasers, and possibly meeting mecha. And these are the same characters in the same campaign in the same game. And that was just a brilliant idea. It was just so out of nowhere, the idea that you could do that. There were multi-genre games, sure, But you had different campaigns for each of those genres. This was one campaign that tied those genres together, and it made sense because of the way in which the game worked. So that was the first thing. The second thing it did was it introduced the idea of playing with cards. Not regular playing cards, and not instead of dice. It has a dice mechanic, which I'll get onto in a minute, because that also was innovative and hadn't been seen before. It's been seen since, but it hadn't been seen before. But it also had a drama deck, and this was used in two ways. First off, whenever you were in combat, initiative was determined by flipping the next card in the drama deck, and it would have two lines on it. It would have a standard encounter line and a dramatic encounter line. And depending on which you were actually in, if you were just slipping past some Adenos Lizardman warriors that had nothing really to do with the scenario, that'd be a standard thing. If you were fighting the boss monster, that's dramatic. And on each line, it would have an H and it would have a V. And the one on the left had initiative. Easy as that. And this was done on a group basis. So it was always all the bad guys had initiative, or all the good guys had initiative. And then within those initiative, you decided what order you went in. So it feels a bit weird for those of us who are used to the idea of having high initiative characters who always go before their friends and things like that.
Yeah.
But it was a very narrative style of play, and the idea was that the player characters would always act in the most beneficial order that they could see, because they chose which order they acted in. So you wouldn't have this situation of, okay, well, I want to back up Bob, so I'm going to have to hold my action until after he's gone. Because you'd simply say, right, well, Bob, you go first.
Yeah.
And that worked very nicely. But the other thing that was on this card, next to the H and the V, there might be a word. For example, it might say flurry, or it might say fatigued. And that side suffered that condition for that round. So if you had a flurry, you could take two actions instead of one. But that could come up on either side. That could come up for the bad guys. It could come up for you. It all depends on which card is flipped over. And in a dramatic encounter, it's more likely to hit the bad guys. So you were never just stuck into that, well, I know I've got a high initiative roll, and I'm particularly for games that don't re-roll initiative every round. And it just becomes a back and forth. D&D 4th edition, for example, which didn't re-roll initiative from round to round, could easily get into that very dull back and forth. I hit you, you hit me, I hit you, you hit me, I hit you, you hit me. Eventually one of us falls over. And fortunately, that game had loads of different exploits and powers that you could use to break that up. So it wasn't just roll my sword, roll my sword, roll my sword. You were making those tactical decisions as to whether you were using with this at-will power or that encounter power, or was this serious enough to throw in my daily power to do some really big damage. And that broke that up and stopped it from being too boring a combat system. This one likes to keep you on your toes. So when you flip over that card, you may have initiative, you may not have initiative, you may have an advantage, you may have a disadvantage, you might lose initiative but gain an advantage. You're never quite sure what's going to come in the next round, and it keeps things very, very interesting, because the GM is of course encouraged to work with that in a dramatic fashion. So I've got a PDF open here from the Kickstarted Torg Eternity reboot, which is showing some of these cards. So the first one we've got here is you try to outflank. So first off, you've got some flavor text and a picture, which is always good. The original edition didn't have the pictures. In a standard encounter, the heroes have initiative but no effect, and the villains are fatigued. So the GM and players are encouraged to work with that. So you try to outflank, it says. So maybe you are trying to outflank. The players might say, okay, cool, it says we tried to outflank, so let's try and outflank them. Or the GM might say, right, that's actually talking about them. They're trying to outflank you, but they try and move, it just isn't working for them. They're all suffering a fatigue condition now because they tried to run across this gap in it and they couldn't get there and they just ducked back under cover. They're now all fatigued. So you just build that in and you get more of a narrative to the combat than you would otherwise. On top of that, at the bottom of the card in this edition, and it was in a different place, it was in the middle on the previous edition, I think, it says maneuver stroke trick. Now, these are actions that can be taken in combat. And if you perform that approved action, you can do anything you want, like any other role-playing game, but if you perform that approved action, you get a benefit, which I'll go into in a moment.
Okay.
So by doing this, not only did it shake up combat because you didn't know quite what was going to happen from round to round, and encourage you to add to the narrative of the combat by giving you the flavor text and the effects, but it also encouraged the players to do more than just punch someone, stab someone, shoot at someone. They might find themselves thinking, well, the approved action here, I need this, and the approved action here is to do maneuver or trick, so maybe I'll maneuver. It says you try to outflank. Surprise, surprise. Maneuver is an approved action. How would you outflank? You'd maneuver. So you get a bonus if you go with the card and you do try to outflank your opponents. Or trick. Again, outflanking could be done by tricking them. They're looking the wrong way. I'm getting my flank attack in because I've tricked them. I've made them look over there. And that would give you your bonus. And what the bonus was down to the cards again. Because in addition to having the cards for initiative, you also had a hand of cards that would give you some advantage. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the PDF open at the moment for these, because in Torg Eternity they split the card deck in two. The original game had a much larger card deck, and one half of the card, the top half of the card, I think it was the initiative information, and the bottom half was the playable information, which would do things like giving you a bonus to certain action types. In Torg Eternity, they've split those two decks up, so you've got a smaller drama deck, but it's only the initiative cards. And then you've got a Destiny deck, which gives you additional cards that give you the various advantages of doing things. So now that, courtesy of Fantasy Grounds, I can actually show, because I've already put that into Fantasy Grounds ready for a campaign. So if I bring up the Destiny deck table that I've got ready to go, and I won't roll it, I'll just open a card. So the first card it's listing here, because these have been shuffled essentially, is now card number 13, which is Action. I'll read this out because A, we want to put this in audio as well, and B, you probably can't read it on screen. So again, nice piece of artwork at the top, gives you an idea of what's going on. In this case, it's I think that's probably a gospog, some sort of a demonic looking creature anyway, being run over by someone in a truck. And the text of it is, add +3 to the total of your test. Action may be played after determining the success level of the test. So if you've got this card, you make your test, you fail, but you're within 3 points, or maybe you succeed, but you could do with doing better. You throw your action card in, get +3 to the total of the test. And the way that works is down to the innovative dice mechanic that I mentioned earlier. So these cards, in normal play, non-combat play in other words, you can just play these when you need them, as you want them. But in combat, things work differently. In combat, you can only play cards from the table in front of you. You have a pool of cards on the table in front of you, and you can play from there. So on your turn, you can put a card from your hand to the pool ready to use. If I'm remembering this correctly, I hope I am. If you perform the approved action in that round, you can draw a card to your hand. And while there is a hand limit size out of combat, there's no limit to how many cards you can have between your hand and your pool in combat. So by doing the right things, you can build up these resources, these cards that will help you. Give you another example of, it's not just the +3 to action. We have here, opponent fails. Play after an opponent has successfully completed a test. The test fails. If this is a contest, reverse the result.
Oh.
So if you've got that on the table in front of you, and the GM has just shot you in the head,
yeah,
you just say, no, I don't think so. Opponent fails. That doesn't work. Or better yet,
evil.
You're wrestling for the Uber device that will end the world with the evil villain, and yes, that kind of stuff can happen. The Nihil Empire is pulp action hero.
Excellent.
King of the Rocket Men, that kind of stuff.
Yes.
You're wrestling with him to get control of the detonator. You lose.
Yeah.
That's a contest. Your opponent fails card, swaps that back over. Suddenly you have the detonator. So the cards become vitally important for keeping the players on top if used correctly. And as a result, you want as many cards as you possibly can get hold of. And then at the end of the combat, you pick all your cards back up and you discard down to your hand size. But you keep the best ones, obviously. So performing the approved actions in a round really does give you a genuine advantage. It gives you more cards with more cool things that you can do. Dice, as I mentioned rather, but haven't explained yet, are a little bit weird. The wording on that card, on the action card, that was, said +3 to the total of your test. Now, in most games, and most players are going to think of this sort of thing when they read this, that would probably be that your test is you roll a die, add maybe your skill bonus or something, and that gives you your test result. So it'd be +3 to that. Not in Torg.
Okay.
In Torg, the dice generate a bonus number. And that bonus number adds directly to one of your stats or skills or what have you to give you your test results. When any modifiers are added, anything at all, they are always added to the test result. They're never added to the bonus number that you've rolled. So your die roll is never modified like that. Dice do explode, so you can get very high die rolls. But the cards don't add to that. The cards add to the final test result instead. So whereas some games you might be in a situation where, for example, I've rolled a natural 20, because Torg does use d20s. I've rolled a natural 20, so that means, I'm adding 20 to my +3 modifier. And you just compare the numbers there for a moment. +3, 20. The dice are the big deal there.
Yeah.
+3 is meaningless against a 20, let's be honest. You've got to really have, to have any meaning against a 20, you've got to have a modifier up there around +10. So Torg doesn't do that. The die roll in Torg is looked up on a little table at the bottom of your character sheet. I'm just trying to find the table now. And it gives you a modifier that adds to your skill. And then those are compared. So it's not my skill plus a d20 versus your skill plus a d20. It's my total test result, which is skill plus the bonus number I've generated, versus your total test result, which is skill plus the bonus number you've generated. And that makes your skill, or your attribute, significant. Very significant indeed. The dice can produce some really big numbers. But because of the way they work, they're biased towards a certain range. And that means if you're really good and your opponent isn't particularly good, then you're always going to beat them unless the dice do something really weird. As I said, the dice can do something really weird, but it's far less likely to happen than if you're just saying, Okay, well, I'm better than you based on the idea we'll both roll roughly a 10 on this d20. But if you roll a 20, you're kicking my ass. Or if I roll a 1, you're kicking my ass. It's not as simple as that. The bonus chart runs from -10 with no theoretical upper limit. An average roll, 11 or 12 on your d20, gives you no bonus at all. So you're just straight skill against skill at that point. If you both roll 11 or 12, your skill against their skill, who wins? You then get plus or minus 1 as you move along the chart. So for every 2-point bracket below that 11 or 12, so 9 and 10, 7 and 8, 5 and 6, 3 and 4, each of them is a minus what? Down to -4, so -6 even. It goes -1, -2, -4, -6, in fact. So it does go down. And then 1 or 2 are really big numbers of -10 and -8. So you roll a natural 1 and you're at -10, and the chances are your attribute's probably around 10, so it's sort of kind of zeroing your attribute.
Ouch.
A natural 20 only adds 7. It's not as big going the other way. But because of the exploding dice mechanics, it's possible to get much bigger numbers than that. So it runs up to, if you get 46, or between 46 and 50, you get a plus 13. And then every additional 5 points beyond that is another 1. If I bring up some characters, we can get a better idea of what these numbers might actually mean. Let's look at the day 1 characters, because as part of the Kickstarter, they created these day 1 adventures, which are effectively they're fast plays to all intents and purposes, because they have pre-generated characters rather than it being that you fit them into your campaign. But there's one for each of the invading cosms, which lets you play through with these pre-generated characters the actual moment of the invasion.
Oh, okay.
And use Storm Knights, which we haven't explained what Storm Knights are yet, but we will, coming into being. So, looking at the first of these characters, Father Alejandro Reyes. As a Storm Knight, he has got a dexterity of 7, a spirit of 10, because he's a priest, so he should have a high spirit, really. So these are the kind of numbers that we are adding to. So, fire combat. He's got +1 skill add with fire combat, plus his dexterity 7 means he's got an 8 as his basic skill. So when he rolls his dice, if he gets an 11 or 12, 8 is the result that he's comparing to his opponent's defences to see whether he's managed to hit him. Running up to potentially as much as 15 for a nat 20. Now, in actual fact, it wouldn't be 15 because it wouldn't be 20, almost certainly. A nat 20 certainly wouldn't be 20 because of the exploding dice. The dice explode on 10s or 20s. So if you roll a 10, you roll again and add it. If you roll a 20, you roll again and add it.
Again and add it. Okay.
Those numbers still exist on the chart because you can get to those numbers by other methods. There are, for example, you can spend possibilities. You have, as a Storm Knight, you have possibility energy. And you can do that to roll another die, essentially. In addition to the natural explosions, you can cause an explosion that way. The initiative cards can give you an up, which lets you roll another die. It's the equivalent of the dice exploding. So these things can happen. But it's this bonus number and this test total that are what the cards add to. So in the case of Alejandro here, he's got his 8 fire combat skill. He's rolled, let's say, a 12, adding nothing to it. He's at 8. He needs a 9 to hit his opponent. Okay, well, an action card adds 3 to that. So, bam, 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 he's there. He's got the guy. And the cards start coming in. It's a very interesting mechanic because it lets you use a d20 which has a good range on it, but it also reduces the impact of that d20. it's normally going to run in the range of maybe -2 to +2 modifier.
Okay.
Rather than 1 to 20 modifier. If you're looking at something like the D20 system, the dice are far more important. Here, we're adding probably, as I say, -2 to +2 to a value of 7 or 8. There, you're adding between 1 and 20 to a value that's more likely to be 4 or 5.
Yeah.
That makes the dice the biggest thing in that system. And if that's what you want to play, that's absolutely fine. But it doesn't fit the heroic narrative of Torg, where who your Storm Knights are and what they are capable of doing is more important than what luck presents them with.
Yeah.
So I've used the word Storm Knights a few times. What is a Storm Knight?
You tell.
A Storm Knight is what all the player characters are in this game. When the cosmos invaded, when the war started, certain people became charged with possibility energy. That's what it's all about, this game. It's all about possibility energy. Core Earth is being invaded to steal its possibility energies, all of its possibilities, so that that power source can be used for the High Lord's own nefarious ends. However, when their bridges landed on Earth, effectively think of this as being like the Rainbow Bridge. It's the Bifrost from Thor. But this time, around where it lands, it changes reality to its own reality.
Okay.
So the Bifrost is the easiest way these days, because most people have seen the Thor movies, to explain the way this works. Where the Bifrost lands on Earth, the rules of Valhalla apply. Or the rules of Asgard, rather, apply. So if on Asgard you can drink vast quantities of mead without getting a hangover in the morning, then next to the Bifrost on Earth you can drink large quantities of mead and not get a hangover in the morning.
Yep.
And people are changed and things are changed along with it. This is because of possibility energy. And when this happened, certain people became charged with this possibility energy, and they are termed Storm Knights, because they can not just stand in and weather the possibility storms that this is all causing, they can actually summon and control those possibility storms at a push.
Are they the ones who can take their own reality with them?
And that's one of the things they can do. Yes.
Sorry.
They
I just
can
thought I'd
use-
remind you that
yeah.
I was here.
They
Because
can
I
use
was
that
just
possibility
nodding.
energy for a number of things. They can roll additional dice to improve their tests. They can spend possibility energy to impose their axioms, the axioms of their existence, which may not be those of Core Earth, even though they are characters from Core Earth originally.
Okay.
But they can impose those axioms on their current location. Not all the Storm Knights remained strictly human, or indeed in some cases human at all. In many cases, although charged with possibility energy, they still converted, they still adapted to the new reality that was taking shape around them on the day of the invasion. Thus, for example, looking at these characters here, let's find the one I'm thinking of. There we go. Lena. Lena is your classic Jane of the Jungle. She is her home cosm is now the Living Land. However, before she became Lena, she was Colleen Bridges from Core Earth. When the invasion came, she changed. She became this female Tarzan. But she's also a Storm Knight. She has the possibility energy. She can fight back. It's just that her reality, the reality she's fighting for, isn't the one that she had before, which she has only vague memories of in the back of her head. So whereas her son Wade, who is from Core Earth still,
Mm-hmm.
can use possibility energy to apply his Tech 23 axiom, for example, to make a car work. His mother has a Tech 6 axiom. Can't do that.
Oh, okay.
But she can use possibility energy to apply her Spirit 24 axiom and get bonuses on spiritual type of things that the normal Spirit 10 Core Earth can't do. Because the living land is all about spirit. It is literally a living land. The spirit of the land is capable of empowering people, etc., etc., etc.
Mega Kami.
So Storm Knights probably come from Core Earth. If you've not played Torg before, you certainly have a character from Core Earth. But their home cosm may not be. It may be one of the invading realities, essentially. Even though they were born and raised originally on Earth, they've become a living land or Nihil Empire version of themselves. And that version is then empowered with possibility energy to be able to fight back. And so what they're doing, gathered together by the Delphi Council, is they are fighting against the schemes of the High Lords, with the ultimate aim of driving them off Earth and returning Earth to what it was. Which is particularly interesting for the ones who have changed as a result. Because someone like Lena there, she is fighting to replace the reality she understands and functions under with one that used to apply to her, but that she doesn't remember anymore. Which is an interesting role-playing challenge.
Yeah. Now I kind of want to line up Torg and the Luther Arkwright RPG.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. Torg does have one other advantage beyond its very, very cool setting, which is that because of the systems involved in that very, very cool setting, you can essentially use Torg as a multi-genre role-playing game.
Okay.
You can say, forget about the invasions of reality, forget about the High Lords, forget about all of that. I like this game system. I'm going to run a standard fantasy dungeon bashing game using Torg, and we will just only use the core system and the rules for the Isle cosm, which is England, Britain, and the area around it, centered really on Britain, which is a standard fantasy setting. So people in London suddenly became elves or dwarves, a bit like in Shadowrun, except that the whole world changed around them, and suddenly areas that now in modern Britain, as those of us who live here know, are urban and overgrown, urban and overpopulated, are suddenly rolling fields again, full of trolls and dragons and wizards.
So not actually all that different to our current reality.
Well,
the trolls bit. Anyway.
Dragons and wizards.
Yeah. Oh my.
So yeah, or if you like cyberpunk, you can say, right, well, I'm just going to use the stuff from the Nippon Tech. Actually, now Pan Pacifica. It was Nippon Tech originally. It's now called, in the new this Torg Eternity, it's called Pan Pacifica.
Okay.
If I remember rightly, which is a cyberpunk cosm. Have we lost? Oh no, it's okay.
No.
Just the connection went wafty for a minute.
Okay, sorry.
So theoretically, you can use any of the settings that's in there as a standalone setting, not as part of the invasion of reality, just as a rule set to play that type of game. And because the game is designed to handle all of these multiple realities and any reality, there are more cosms than were published in the original game in 1990. They added a couple more in source books during the 90s. And in Torg Eternity, those are included in the core rulebook. Because of that, you can use those same mechanics to create any reality you want. So if you're not using one of the ones in the book, there's more work for you to do because you've got to create the equipment and things like that. But you can just say, right, well, none of these is quite what the game that I want, so I'm just going to tweak these axioms. I'll change the magic here up a couple, I'll put the tech there down a couple, I'll up the spirit a little bit there, and I'll leave social as it is, and now I've got a completely new reality that I can play in.
Okay.
And the rules of that reality are hardwired into the game system. This was a big influence on me when I was writing Obsession. The mechanisms in that for controlling reality in that multi-genre game are inspired. They're not taken from Torg, but they're inspired by Torg. Torg showed me that it could be done, and I set out and did it.
Yeah.
So Torg can work as a multi-genre game as well as just being a really cool game in its own right, and it is a game that I really want to play and I really want to run. So it's not currently in our schedule, because I also want players for it. What I originally had in mind was to run the day one adventures, each of which has 6 characters. I don't necessarily need 6 players to run it, but I'd really like at least 4 for each of them, and I haven't been able to get those 4 players, so I haven't run them yet. So what I'm going to do instead, I think, is after a couple of other things that I have lined up, I've got more Coriolis to come, obviously. I've got more Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition to come. And I've got a number of other games that I want to run. We've got some Star Trek coming up because I need to get some additional sci-fi in there.
Cool.
After that, though, I want to run some Torg. So while I would still love to play the Day One adventures, all of the Day One adventures ideally, eventually, within place, and get them all on YouTube, I'm no longer thinking of doing that as how we introduce people to Torg. We've had this little talk about what Torg is here. I'm going to get you to create some characters. I'm just going to run some Torg. Got plenty of scenarios, plus my own imagination. I can run some Torg stuff. And with that, I can gear that to how many players I've got. If I've just got Drutt and Night, I can just run it for Drutt and Night. If other people want to play, I can bring more players in, absolutely fine. If I suddenly find I've got 6 people saying, yeah, I'd like to play Torg, see what it's like, I can say, right, okay, then let's do, to begin with, let's do one of the first of the Day One adventures, and then take it from there. If you still want to play after that, you can create your own characters and we'll do a campaign. So Torg is a thing. It's going to happen on Hint Place, because I'm a big fan.
That works for me.
Which brings us to the question of, are we going to do character creation for Torg like we did for Advanced Fighting Fantasy?
We could do.
AFF is a much simpler game. And it has far fewer character creation options. My instinct is to say no about Torg, simply because it can be a bit
involved.
And a bit intimidating, to be honest. Because, for starters, you're not just creating a character. You're not just saying, okay, the GM tells you this is what the setting is, what kind of character do you want to create? The GM says, which of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 settings do you want to create your character from?
A good point.
So the obvious is you say, okay, everybody knows Core Earth. We all know what Core Earth is. So all create Core Earth characters. But then that's really hampering the players. This is why I would like to be able to do the Day One adventures, to introduce what the different settings are. Some of them are relatively simple. I mean, Isle is a fantasy realm, so if you want to do a D&D type character in this game, then you're getting a character from there. The Nile Empire is the pulp 1930s pulp adventure type stuff with rockets and Tesla inspired weapons and things like that, and set in Egypt. And so that's fairly simple to explain. Pan Pacifica is a cyberpunk setting. That one's not too difficult. But then we get into things like the cyber papacy. So we're still cyberpunk, as the name suggests, but we're also magic, We're the blending of the two things. We're an evil Catholic church.
Okay.
And we're a situation where the terms like demon applied to computer programs are not quite so metaphorical as they might be in the real world.
Okay.
And it's quite an involved setting that's quite difficult to get across to somebody in that small space of time, just talking through what's your character going to be. Orosh is, for you, not really a problem. I can say to you, Drutt, it's Victorian horror, the setting.
Okay, fair enough.
And you know what we're dealing with here.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of players wouldn't necessarily know that. So, if you want to be creating Van Helsing, this is where you're going. You're going to Orosh. That's where he would come from. Tharkold gets even weirder. In fact, let me look up Tharkold, because off the top of my head, I don't even know how to explain that one. That's one of the ones that wasn't in the original core book. It's part of why I don't know how to explain Tharkold. Do we have Cosms? Sorry about this.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Tharkold is a realm of techno-horror in the cities and near post-apocalyptic survival in the vast reaches between. It is a world where techno-demons rule enslaved humans, crudely called the Race. Tharkoldu prides are in turn ruled by 7 powerful dukes, chief of which is High Lord Cranod. So, post-apocalyptic demonic horror.
Okay.
This is cyber demonic after the bomb.
Excellent.
And that's kind of okay, that's interesting.
That sounds really cool, actually.
Yeah. Tharkold wasn't in the original box and proved to be really, really popular and significant in the original campaigns. The original campaign for Torg actually did finish. It concluded, unlike most games. It did what Vampire did and didn't quite have the nerve to keep. Vampire, the Masquerade, produced... was it Gehenna?
Yes.
Essentially, right from the very beginning, there was this mythical end time on the way in Vampire the Masquerade. And it happened. They published it. Now, if you didn't buy that book and run it, your Vampire game just carries on going. But the official support, of course, went, right, bang, that's it. End of the Vampire world.
Yeah.
The new edition has apparently retconned that. It was a major event, but it wasn't the end. But I liked the idea, and I liked it in Torg, that they had this conclusion. The Storm Knights won in Torg, and the invasion was beaten off eventually. And this was done through a combination of what was essentially organised play, before organised play was particularly big. There was always the RPGA playing D&D, but it wasn't the same kind of organised play. It didn't have that kind of feedback that it does now that changes things based on what different groups were doing. Torg did. It had these scenarios that the players were feeding back how it went in their world, and that was shaping what came next. A combination of that and 3 novels brought the Torg story to a close. So Torg Eternity is presented as another part of the Infiniverse, because multiple, potentially infinite Earths have been invaded simultaneously by these realms. So in that realm, the invasion took place in the 90s and has been defeated. And this Earth, it's taken place now. And we've got to fight it again. Because this is a different Earth. This is a different invasion. This one hasn't been won yet. Which was just taking advantage of the Infiniverse, which was always a thing with Torg. In fact, it was the name of the magazine, essentially, that they put out, was Infiniverse, and each one had new information and kept people up to date with what was happening based on the feedback and so forth. Infiniverse in the new version has become the equivalent of the DM's Guild. So now, as with D&D and the DM's Guild, you can produce your own Torg material under the Infiniverse banner, which is non-canon, but you can put it out there and put it on Drive-Thru RPG or what have you and let people use it.
Yeah.
And Ulysses Spiel provides you with a whole bunch of resources for doing that. Officially sanctioned for use art, logos, things like that. So if I just jump back to Fantasy Grounds for a second, this rather nice blue marble backdrop that my Fantasy Grounds is using may look familiar to anybody looking closely at the Torg Eternity rulebook, because it's that blue marble backdrop there, provided so that people can put it into their onto the covers of their Infiniverse products that they put out. Logos and artwork of the iconic Storm Knights that are used as examples in the books as well. Things like that are available so that you can make your own Infiniverse product actually look like Torg. But obviously labelled Infiniverse, and people know that it's not canon, that it's yours. They can use it or not as they feel like it. So that's rather a nice way of doing things, in my opinion. And it's very, very useful for those of us who want a nice background to put into Fantasy Grounds when playing Torg. I need to put together buttons for the whole of the rest of the theme to make it a proper Torg theme, but at least I've got the background there already. And as I mentioned earlier, and as can be seen on stream, I've already put the card images in for the Destiny deck. Haven't done the drama deck yet. Probably will do the drama deck. I could just flip the cards over. I've got the real cards. But that way I'd have to tell the players what it was. If I put the graphics for those cards, which I can take from the PDFs that came from the Kickstarter.
Yeah.
Nice and easy for the technically savvy to take those graphics out of the PDF and put them into Fantasy Grounds. And I believe, in fact, that for Roll20 rather than Fantasy Grounds, you can actually buy those decks now, pre-made, all ready to go in Roll20. Little awkward in Fantasy Grounds because it doesn't have native card support. I'm using an extension that lets me use cards, and then I've imported the graphics from the PDFs for the Destiny deck. But if I do the same thing with the drama deck, then of course I can just flip over that card, share that card image with the players, and they can see the current initiative card for themselves.
That makes sense.
Rather than me just have to tell them.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to do. But as I said, Torg is a little bit complicated for the tail end of a live stream when it comes to character creation. So
okay.
I really want to create Torg characters, and probably what I'll try and do is organise another one of these streams just for the purpose of creating Torg characters when we're closer maybe to it coming up in the schedule, with you and Nightbites and anyone else who expresses an interest in playing, and we'll go through character creation as a group, which is always the best way to do it anyway for games like this, because it also lets us form bonds between characters. Why are your characters working together? When one of you is a dinosaur man from New York and another one is a high-tech but 30s style pulp hero from Cairo, and another one is an elven wizardess from Cardiff. Why are these characters working together? So it's the kind of thing that it's really good to have the group created all in one go, because otherwise the GM's got to try and get these characters together somehow. So that's Torg Eternity. Excellent game. It's already, by the way, onto it's had its third Kickstarter, which I'm waiting on the books from now. Got the PDFs, waiting on the hard copy. So that's the first Kickstarter was for Torg Eternity, to reboot the whole thing, with some excellent talent behind it, by the way. Some from the original Torg design team, and some who are big fans, influenced hugely by the original Torg, who came in to work on this one. So, for example, Shane Lacey Hensley, who people might know from Savage Worlds or Deadlands. Pinnacle Entertainment? Trying to remember the name of the company suddenly.
Yes.
Yes, I think Pinnacle. He was a big fan of Torg and leapt at the chance. So he was involved in this new version.
Cool.
A lot of the people from the original came back as a result of the Kickstarter to work on this new version as well. And some new people working on it. And so you've got a combination of to the old school minds behind it and some fresh new talent coming in as well. Really, really good. The second Kickstarter was the Living Land sourcebook. And that produced not only a sourcebook on the Living Land, which is where a lot of things will take place, because that's North America. Not all of North America, but the North American continent, the portions of it that have been invaded by the Living Land. So for a lot of players, that's kind of the area that's closest to home. That's where it's easier to go from the place in the world you know because you grew up in Milwaukee to a version of it that is dinosaur than it is if you grew up in Thanet and you're not just trying to get your head round the dinosaur realm that isn't where you know, but you're also trying to get your head around the idea that your character should know it as somewhere else you don't know.
Yeah, this is the problem.
So it's much easier to play, to get into character, if you're in an area that you know what it's supposed to be like. So the Living Land was the first one, and that produced this source book. These Kickstarters have all been massively overfunded. They've blown through and produced stretch goals galore, all three of these. So we've got a set of scenarios with each of the Kickstarters. So there was a set of scenarios with Torg Eternity, which Kickstarter backers got that. But you can also just go out and buy it. It's not, oh no, only the Kickstarter people get this. The Kickstarter people got this at no extra cost because it was a stretch goal. Then it's available. You can go on Amazon and you can buy it, or you can go to your local indie game store and say, get me the Delphi Rising. I think it's Delphi Rising. Delphi Missions something to do with Rising, definitely. Sorry.
Yeah.
And then Living Land gave us another book of Delphi missions. It also gave us the God Box. I think it was the God Box with that one rather than with the third one, which is a full campaign length almost scenario.
Okay.
It gave us a set of boosters to the drama deck. So you have specific versions of drama deck cards for use when playing in the Living Land, which are just slightly twisted according to the laws that operate in the Living Land. So I can replace out the initiative deck with one that is the same initiative cards in terms of their core results, but each has something extra on top that is suitable for play in the Living Land. It added additional cards to the Destiny deck, though they're inspired by the Living Land, but aren't exclusive to the Living Land. So they just add in those extra cards to the Destiny deck, and you've got more options to play with when you're dealing out a hand of cards to the players. All sorts of cool stuff like that. Then the next one was the Nile Empire. The pulp tech, heroic adventure, mystery men thing. And that did the same thing. Sourcebook, new cards, new scenarios. At least one of these came with a soundtrack. In fact, there was a soundtrack with Torg Eternity as well. So I've got the MP3 soundtrack to Torg Eternity and to either the Living Land or the Nile Empire. The God Box was Living Land, and I've got a soundtrack to that.
Okay.
And then we got the Nile Empire one, and that had Fires of Ra as its big scenario, in addition to the Delphi Missions Nile Empire set. And there's a soundtrack to the Fires of Ra. So these two big scenarios that came with these Kickstarters, each has a soundtrack for you to play while you're going through it, with tracks specifically written for key scenes in the scenario. This is the kind of stuff that you're getting from your Torg Kickstarters. They're really doing a fantastic job with it.
I have to say that I am a huge fan, of the 1930s and 40s pulp serials.
Indeedy.
I utterly adore things like King of the Rocket Men. I'm a total sap for that sort of thing.
Yeah. Let's just bring up this PDF of Nile Empire archetypes. So that's another thing that Torg does, which is a very useful thing because of how difficult it can be to get your head around the characters. Not the system of character creation, but what your options are for character creation. Is it has templates, essentially, archetype characters. And Torg did this back in the 90s as well, and Infiniverse kept publishing more. There were just so many possible characters that, yeah, you could create a character from scratch, but to be honest, you could probably find an archetype that would work in Torg and just take that. And here we've got, the Amartist Hemnetja. No clue at all, but fortunately we have among the devoted who worship the Ennead, the pantheon of 9 Egyptian gods and goddesses, the Hemnetja are those who are blessed with a deeper attunement with the divine. So okie dokie, there we go. We've got effectively an Egyptian pantheistic priest there.
Yeah.
And then we've got an Amazon warrior. We've got a Bantu seer, former gangster.
Okay. So
Nile
I was going
engineer,
consistent. The hell.
Nile mathematician.
Okay.
Mysterious order of astrologers and seers of Chem. Pharaoh Mobius's homeworld turned to algorithms in the orbits of heavenly bodies to perform a sort of magic, using the mystical properties of numbers to predict the future and affect the world around them. Mathematicians.
And any chance of playing somebody called Chandu?
Yes, you could do Chandu. You've got a magic attribute of 14, axiom of 14 in the Nile Empire. Magic works in the Nile Empire.
Chandu.
It's got, the tech is a bit below Earth. Full Earth is 23. Nile Empire is 20, but Nile Empire has a higher spirit and magic axiom, so its technology is twisted by those things to give us this pulp tech that, while technically lower tech than Earth is, in many cases works better, like being able to have rocket packs. Got the vengeful hero here, which is your classic mystery man type.
Yeah.
The plucky kid, because you've got to have a plucky kid in these things.
You've got to have a plucky kid, yes, absolutely.
The Kung Fu Master, which is where we're getting into the fact that it has a higher spirit attribute, applies for things like Kung Fu.
Yeah.
The Rocket Ranger.
Yes.
The Rocket Rangers were an elite unit with the US Armed Forces during the Great War on Terror. Some of the Rocket Rangers who came across with the Mystery Men were former soldiers, but others were widows of Rangers killed by pulp villains during the 1920s.
Okay.
And the Rocket Rangers have Rocket Ranger suits. They've got the right, and it even looks right.
Yay.
Let me just bring, I forgot to put Adobe back up on the stream, but there we go. For anyone on the stream, that is a pretty good, though slightly more steampunk version of what we were looking at back in, well, before our time, but when we were kids, they were being shown on the television in the UK. Things like King of the Rocket Men and so forth.
Saturday morning.
Flash Gordon serials and things like
that.
And that's the kind of rocket suit that they had, even down to... If you ever saw the film The Rocketeer, for example, that was based on those, and that had the right look as well. This absolutely has that look. Then we get on to the Daredevil pilot, who's a bit Crimson Skies, for those who've watched our Crimson Skies game. Flying Ace. Then we get on to a torch singer. In the wealthy nightclubs and cabarets of Cairo, high-class entertainment helps the upper crust of society keep their minds off the crime-ridden streets of the city in the drudgery of war. The mysterious bruiser. We're back on the mystery men type thing here. The kind of tough. Strength 12. Yeah, very tough. Masked man, the young vigilante, the champion of the land. So there we're getting very much into kind of the old school Black Panther before he became technological, comics wise. because he kind of got retconned to being technology, but the original Black Panther was more like the spirit of the land, wasn't it? That powered him. Or maybe in a more extreme form, Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
The Pulp Sorcerer, as I said. Chandu rubs his ring.
Mm-hmm.
In the realm of mysterious magic, pulp sorcerers have learned that the art of arcane, elaborate rituals which date back to Terra's ancient past have only recently returned. Their magic is flamboyant and conspicuous, with flashy effects and theatrical techniques, such as shouting the incantation's name during its casting. I think there's a touch of anime coming in on this.
Yay! Psychic pulse effect.
Quote for this character: "Burning bolt of Baktet." Zap. So yeah, it's very much, as you tell from those character archetypes from Nile Empire, it is properly pulp. So you've got your sort of 30s style superheroes and tech heroes and adventurers running around in the Nile Empire. I could very much see you creating a Nile Empire character. It is definitely your kind
I
of
adore
thing.
that. I love that whole thing.